very kind to sit through several interview sessions, but that was about politics. This book is primarily about your upbringing, your military career. Why did you decide to write this type of book rather than primarily a political book?
Well, I felt like I wanted to inspire people. You know, my story is not really, it's only been the last few years that my story has been the political story. It's really more about following your dreams and finding something that you want to do, having obstacles along the way that do have a bit of a political nature, but were really just obstacles we had to find a way through. And with hard work, year after year, achieving them. And so it was really, I wanted to inspire young Americans to follow their dreams, but I also wanted to inspire people to believe in our country and our American values. And I know that there is a lot going on right now, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of that, but you know, America at its core is good. And that's why I wanted to write the book.
Well, that it is inspiring. I would encourage everyone to buy it. It was fascinating. For someone who is not in the military, I found your training experience and the toll that takes physically, mentally, emotionally fascinating. Can you share with the audience a little bit about that and whether that process of training before you got to actually flying, and certainly flying in combat, was what you expected or something very different?
I knew it would be difficult. And I had mentors along the way who gave me hints about how difficult it was going to be. And one of the things that I did in order to prepare for that training was, you know, continue to seek out mentors and find how am I best ready for the next evolution, because I didn't want to fail. And so that's what I did. And it took many, many years. And, you know, it was hard. Marine Corps training, taking 50 pounds and put it on your back and hiking 20 miles and then add some more weight in at the very end. Night land navigation, which was a bit of my downfall, at least temporarily, at the basic school at Quantico, all the way up to survival school, where you're not allowed to eat. That's something that a lot of people don't experience. You get thrown out in the wilderness, and how are you going to perform without food? And that was definitely an eye-opening experience. All of the training was. But what I learned in that process is that, you know, success isn't gender specific. A lot of the training tests your mental toughness as much or even more so than your physical toughness.
In the book, you tell a story of leading a group, and a particularly recalcitrant member of the group that you were with, who is the quintessential complainer, whiner. Share how you dealt with him and what you kind of learned from that experience as a woman in a leadership role.
Well, this was a gentleman who we were the same rank, and your job is to lead a platoon of your peers, which is pretty hard to do if you're the same rank. And he was a guy who, you know, we had to rotate through carrying what's called the squad automatic weapon, which is the larger weapon. It's harder to do. And it was his turn, and he just kept complaining. We were out in the field for, I don't know, 3 or 4 days at this point, which is, you know, gets pretty old, and you get pretty tired of the people that you're working with. And we needed I was the platoon commander. I was the squad leader. So we needed the morale. I wanted the morale to be high. I wanted people to accomplish the mission. And, you know, he just kept complaining. And I at one point I said, well, I thought in my mind, I can take this weapon of his and I'll carry it, and that'll shut him up, because everybody's tired of listening to this guy. And, you know, if I'm the leader, I want to be a leader by example. That's been my whole story. Those are the best leaders. They're the ones that, you know, do it. And so I took his weapon from him, gave him my lighter weapon, and said, you know, here you go. Now be quiet, not in those words, but in words similar. And basically what it showed was that all the rest of the men were they were like, well, let's not mess with Amy, let's not mess with McGrath because she's serious and she wasn't going to take it. Wasn't going to take this guy. And I think, to me, it's about leadership, stepping up.
Right. You reached a point in your career where you made, if not a U-turn, at least a 90-degree turn, and went in a slightly different direction in your career that you were kind of warned might not work out for you. Can you describe a little bit of what that was and why you persisted, even though there was a risk that you would be, in essence, derailing or at least stalling your career?
The transition from backseat to front seat, that was a big decision, and not many people do it in the Marine Corps. I flew F-18s, which is a 2-seat variant of the F-18 Hornet. I was a backseater first, and I had a unique opportunity to be in the front seat, but I also knew that I would be starting what we call at the bottom of the totem pole again. I'd lose all my qualifications, all my instructor qualifications, and I'd start from the very beginning and have to work myself back up. And I had a lot of senior officers tell me, this is not the path to being a general. This is not the path. What are you doing? And me sort of taking a step back and saying, well, the goal is not to be a general for me. The goal is to fly in combat in the front seat. And to be a fighter pilot. That was my goal since I was 12. So I chose to take that, direction in my career, and I don't regret it one bit.
And just to clarify for the audience, the front seat is the person who's actually flying the airplane, and the second seat is not. So you attained your lifelong dream. You are a groundbreaker in many respects as a woman. And then you go off to combat. And I found your description of combat so moving and so affecting. It's very hard to translate a book into this short period of time, and certainly your experience. But can you share a little bit about sort of the emotional toll, what you call the moral injuries that take place in war? I found that so effective and so moving.
It's hard for me to talk about. It was hard to write. I found it easier to write than to talk about. I think when you're somebody who is did what I did, and you drop ordnance, they aren't just bombs that go and destroy bridges and buildings. They destroy people. And sometimes you can see the images of people. And I think at the time when you're doing it, it's very clinical. You're performing the mission, you're watching all your gauges, you're making sure that you're communicating with the friendly forces so that you don't, drop in the wrong places. It's really later when you start to relive the images that you saw, things that you did. And for me, it was later. And it wasn't even later, meaning like after you land the jet and you go back to the tent. It wasn't even for me while I was there in theater. It was when I came back home. And that's, for me, was the hardest part of coming back home, was thinking back to what I did over there, knowing that, for both the conflicts for Afghanistan and Iraq, they were different. With Iraq, we slowly learned that war was started under false pretenses. And that hit me pretty hard,
You lost a dear friend and someone that you flew with. And that was certainly a major event in your life. Tell us a little bit about that, and then how you coped with that.
Well, Sugar Bear was a colleague of mine who I worked next to every single day in Afghanistan. And he went up, he was an AH-1 pilot. He would fly every few days and he went up on a mission and never came back. He was shot down by an RPG. And I will never forget that, because it was at that point where I remember going to the chapel tent. We had a tent there, and just trying to rationalize what just happened. Why is this man, this great American, gone? And what am I going to say to his family? And I didn't have a good reason for why, he died. And as I watched his casket go into a C-130 that night, when we had found the remains to fly him back home, I just felt this deep sense of, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? Why are we here? And there's just no other words for it. And that was also eye-opening for me.
How did you cope with that? We know that many people, either returning or in theater, don't really have a support system, don't really have a coping mechanism. You were fortunate to have one. Tell us a little bit about who that was and how you relied on them, and why that's important to have. I think it's a good life lesson that we all need our support system, even if we're not in combat.
Yeah, well, for me, it was my mother. My mother, who is trained as a medical doctor and also a psychiatrist. And I can remember coming back home from my combat tours, and at one combat tour, not really wanting anybody there. And then sort of at the last minute, calling up mom and saying, can you be there when I come home? Because I'm not sure of how my mental state is. And, mom just being there and never pressuring me to tell her what had happened, but she was there to kind of guide me along for trying to be normal again, if that makes sense. Just having somebody there to say, hey, are you going out for a walk today? Are you eating well? That sort of thing is, that's what you need. And it's not always so obvious that people have trouble, but I certainly did.
And faith was also an important part of your life. I assume it still is. What did that provide you? What kind of grounding or perspective did that give you?
Well, I think you always come back to faith, because for me, it was a grounding mechanism. I grew up Catholic. I am Catholic. I went to church. It was a way to connect me back to home. It was a way to connect me back to everything that I knew to be true and that I loved. And so when you're out there in the Middle East and you're doing, you're dropping bombs and it's just a completely different world. It's hard to be connected back to what you, to your life back here. And for me, the church and faith was a way to do that. At one point, I talk about in the book, we used to have in all of the military bases, you have these prayer books that they would have. And I remember taking one of them and then taking two of them actually, and shipping one home to my dad, so that he and I could say the same prayer on the same day, because the prayers would be linked up with, okay, here's today's psalm or whatever. And so that I could be connected. It was a way to stay human.
Very powerful in the telling. Coincidentally, we're now at a point in which we are removing all combat troops from Afghanistan. Things are predictably not going well. As we're having this conversation, the Taliban is in fact moving into cities now, taking, not simply countryside, but cities. And we are also talking about our exit, although perhaps in a different timetable, perhaps not removing everyone from Iraq. How did we get to 20 years of war only to leave with such a indecisive end? those of us who were old enough, at least at some level, to remember Vietnam, thought were done with these wars that weren't winnable, that chewed through people and treasure. How did this happen?
Well, I think it's just many years of, we have our military, we ask our military to go in there and provide security, and we have a number of different missions when you go over there. And that, our military, we're sort of a can-do kind of people. We want to tackle the mission, and we want to come home. And I think that just happened year after year after year, and with not a whole lot of people always looking at the big picture as to, what are we doing here? Are we really helping? It's not an easy answer to your question. I always tell people, and I tried to describe this in my book, Afghanistan is very much a country of survivors. And I come back here to Kentucky, and sometimes people ask me about Afghanistan, and they want to sort of make it into a black and white. Are these guys for us, or are they against us? And I try to explain, the Afghans, most of them will be for us if it will save their families' lives and themselves. And they will be against us if it can save their livelihood and their lives. It's not that they are ideologically motivated. They're not asking for a Jeffersonian democracy, most of them. They just want to survive. They want, to provide for their families. And I think that we have sort of forgotten that the Taliban is sitting there waiting. They've been waiting for years for us to leave. And now here we are.
It's also significant that just this week, Congress is finally repealing the authorization for use of military force, which were entered into in the wake of 9/11 and have taken us 20 years. What's your view on whether we should be using that as a method of authorizing force? And if there's a problem with that, how should we change it? How should we make sure that we're not on, pardon the expression, autopilot for 20 years?
Yeah. Well, we've, as I've written before, we're on legislative fumes when it comes to this. I mean, the authorization and use of military force is essentially a declaration of war. We haven't declared war, as you know, since probably World War II. But we have used this mechanism as a form of authorizing war or the use of force. And I think the problem is that, in our Constitution, it says that in Article 1, Section 8, it says that, Congress is supposed to be the body that declares war, that authorizes the use of force. And they did that in this case after 9/11. The problem is that, if you read that declaration, it's really to go after Al-Qaeda and associated forces. And now we've branched out into this sort of global war on terror for the past 20 years that is going after all kinds of entities that may not even be associated with Al-Qaeda in any way. And in some cases, they're actually against Al-Qaeda. And we've used that as a justification. And in my opinion, Congress has completely punted its responsibility. They should have repealed this authorization years ago and provided a new one if we needed it. And I think we should have had a debate about that. And the other reason why this is important is that when Congress debates something, you bring in the American public, you bring in people, okay? And one of the problems with Afghanistan and Iraq over time is that the American people have been disconnected. They have been asked to do virtually nothing with regards to these wars. Now, veterans have and their families have, but everybody else not. We put the wars on a credit card. And so I happen to think if we're going to send our men and women to war, that the American people ought to vote on it through their representatives and continue to vote on it. I think that's the responsibility of citizens, and it's the responsibility of Congress.
I think most of us would heartily agree with that. We fast forward to January 6, 2021, and all of us witnessed something we thought we would never in our lives ever view. Tell us what you were doing that day and what you were thinking as these unbelievable events were in fact unfolding.
Yeah. Well, the morning was a good morning. The morning we found out that the two senators in Georgia who were Democrats won. And that was important to me because I had rolled my entire finance operation the day after I lost my race in Kentucky over to the Georgia races so that we could raise resources for those races. And we did that, raised about $1 million in 5.5 weeks, and sent it all down there in order to get out to vote. So we were, my small team at that point was very excited, and we all came together to sort of watch what was happening in Georgia. And then we took the afternoon off, and I went to visit my mother. And while I'm at my mother's house, we basically were getting texts. I was getting texts from, didn't have the TV on. I was getting texts from friends saying, you know, what's going on in the Capitol? And that's when I turned the TV on, like many Americans, and watched with shame, with shock and shame that this could happen. You know, a Confederate flag in a rotunda. Never, and as we start to peel back, right, how this happened, never in my lifetime did I ever think we would see a president, former president, who did not want a peaceful transfer of power and literally tried to stage a coup. It's still shocking.
Obviously, this country elected Donald Trump, and tens of millions of people voted for him. We now have, if one is to believe the polls, millions of people who believe that what we saw with our own eyes on 1/6 was something totally different. You see TV hosts smearing the four extraordinary officers who went to the Hill to testify. How do you process that? And what do you think the rest of us should be doing about that, when we have so many people who seem to be so far down a rabbit hole of non-truth, anti-truth, not to mention really turning their backs on democracy?
Well, it makes me very sad to begin with. And part of me, probably like many people, just wants to just, you know, throw up my hands and say, this is crazy. I can't do this anymore. But what it tells me is we got to keep fighting. You know, I was at my son's baseball practice a few weeks ago, and another parent and I were talking, and she had mentioned to me, well, you know, I haven't really watched the news, or I haven't really gotten into politics in the last 9 months, ever since Joe Biden won and Trump is gone. I kind of feel like we're going to be okay, you know, and sort of this attitude of, I just don't want to hear about it anymore. We're fine. And I get that, like I could sense, and she just wants to get back to baseball and fun and barbecues, you know, and I do too, but this is not over. And I think that the events of January 6th have shown us that the continual, you know, the Republican Party, frankly, when after January 6th, I kind of thought, well, maybe now it'll be the last straw. And we saw that, right, with Senator McConnell giving this floor speech on the Senate, that people are like, wow, it's great American. Look at this guy. He's a real leader. And then, you know, a week later, he's praising the President Trump again. And now, you know, he won't allow a commission to happen. And I mean, it's like, and then on top of that, you see the Republican Party still trying to push this disinformation and kind of turn history around. It's very concerning. And what it shows me is that, gosh, if you're a patriotic American, you've got to stay involved. Politics is not somebody else's job. It's all of our jobs. That's what it tells me.
I get this question a lot from readers who say, you know, do we despair? And obviously despair is the worst thing to do, because once you give up, then your democracy kind of trails away. We do want to leave time for some questions for the audience, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about what you're doing now. Tell us what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what effect you think it might have on this problem of one party that's kind of gone off the deep end.
Well, I have a number of initiatives. One is a super PAC called Democratic Majority Action, which is basically going after and trying to remove those folks who voted against our democracy on January 6th. Those members who can be defeated, and there are a number of members who voted in districts that, frankly, that even Biden won, that can be defeated, who we are going to go after. So that's what I'm focused on. But I'm also really focused on my new initiative called Honor Bound, which is obviously my book, but it's also a 501c4 that is going to inspire and help support women who have served this country to run for political office. You know, in 2018, there were 8 of us women veterans who ran for House seats, and 5 got in. 3 of us didn't, unfortunately, but 5 did, and they're still in office right now. Abigail Spanberger and Alyssa Slotkin and Elaine Luria and Mikey Sherrill. They're amazing. They're not the loudest members of Congress, but they're doing great work. I happen to believe we need more of them. We only have 25% women in Congress. That's not good enough. We need way more. And I want the same types of people with character and integrity who have proven that they've served the country in the past to step up and run for these offices. So that's what my initiative is about. And anybody that's interested in that can go to honorboundamericans.com.
I would add that those 5 women took on a nickname for themselves, which was the 5 badasses, which they absolutely wear as a badge of honor. And I got to know several of them in the course of doing my book. And boy, tremendous patriots, smart, dedicated, doing it for the right reason. I will call on my hosts, our hosts from Politics and Prose. Do we have some questions from the audience that Amy might answer?
Absolutely. We have some questions pouring in. So just a quick reminder for everyone, now would be your time to get any questions in if you would like them asked. So we have a few questions. Let's start with this one from Robert here. Robert asks, could a Democrat possibly win a statewide election in Kentucky?
Well, Democrat did win a statewide election in Kentucky in 2019. Andy Beshear won the governor race here. So yes, I think it is possible.
So here's one from an anonymous attendee, and one I've heard myself. He says, my nephew just left the Marine Corps. He has told me that he was taught to, quote, embrace the suck. Did you encounter this during your experiences within the Marines?
I have heard that phrase many times. Sometimes I say that phrase to my children. No, I'm kidding. No, it's, I think that the Marine Corps prides itself on being a pretty tough unit, a pretty tough organization. We typically don't always have the latest and greatest technology or the latest and greatest gear. And so, that's a term that we use to sort of just, hey, it's not easy, but you just have to live with it. One of the things I talked about in my book, and Jennifer brought it up, is training. Marine Corps training is very difficult. And, to get through it, you just have to have that mental toughness. And a lot of people don't like it. And I'm not somebody that really loved it either, frankly, when I was going through it, but you get through it, and there's a reason. So.
I have one here from Jean, but I'm going to slightly alter it. And because Jean wants to know, in a sense, are you planning any more political campaigns in the future?
Right now I'm in a supporting role. And I have run 2 really hard races here in Kentucky. And I think it's important for other people to step up and go after these seats, and I do believe that we need better leaders in government. And all these campaigns that I did in the last 4 years, I know this sounds trite maybe, but they weren't about me. They were about getting better leaders in our government. And so I feel like what I'm doing with Honor Bound going forward, helping others try to get into offices and kicking out those that don't have integrity, that is just as important as running the races I ran. So I'm not sure about what I'll do in the future as far as me running again, but I certainly want to help others who have honor and integrity step up to the plate.
Excellent. So this is from an anonymous attendee, and they would like to know, do you have any leadership advice that you specifically would give to teens or young adults in particular?
Yes. I would say when people ask me what is the key trait to success with all the things that you have done and all the things that you may do in the future, meaning even night carrier landings or going up against Mitch McConnell on national TV in a debate. What is the single biggest trait? And I would say it's courage. And courage is not something you are born with. It's something that you develop. And you develop it by doing hard things. And you develop it by doing things you think you cannot do. And you start with the little ones. And every time you start with a little one and you tackle it and you achieve it, you take that and you put it in your back pocket and you go after the next one. And that's what I would say is something that the young leaders should be thinking about doing. Do the hard things. Take the hard course. You think you can't run 3 miles? Go do it. Build yourself up, find those challenges, and then make them happen. And you'll gain the confidence that you need to go and do bigger and better things.
Let me interject a question. You are once again teaching young men and women. You were an instructor at Annapolis for a number of years. How does your experience in combat now inform how you teach? What do you think you now bring to the classroom that maybe you didn't before you were engaged in combat?
That's a great question. I think I am somebody that now more than maybe I used to, I want to cut to the chase. What do you really need to know? And why is it so important? When I was teaching in Annapolis, and one of the reasons I decided to jump into the political arena was that here I was in an institution where if you lie, cheat, or steal, you're kicked out. And we had, in 2016, we elevated a man to the presidency who basically ran on lying and cheating and was proud of it, and I felt like that was so against everything that I was trying to teach these young midshipmen. It wasn't just teaching them about government or national security. It was about teaching them about leadership. And so, for me, I always want to cut to the chase, and I always want to tell people why it matters that you are somebody that people can trust. Why does it matter that you are somebody of character? So and I learned those things in combat. I learned those things in the military. And those of us that have served, it doesn't take us very long to look at each other in the eye and we get it. We get it in a way I think a lot of other people maybe don't.
Well, here's a quick one. Someone wants to know if, I guess I'll make this a two-part. A, does your book come in audio format? And B, if not, will you be interested in narrating a copy of it?
That's a great question. Yes, it does come in audio format, and I did narrate it. I did it at the end of June. It took me 4 days in the studio, and I had never done anything like that before. It's quite an experience. And what I learned from that experience was that it is a lot easier to write some things than it is to say them out loud. So I would encourage you to get the audiobook. It was fun.
And I must say, reading the book, I actually read it because I'm old fashioned and like, a physical book in my hand. Your voice comes through so clearly. It is such a genuine expression of who you are. And you really hear Amy McGrath as you're reading the book.
Good.
So here is another one from anonymous attendee. And I know you already mentioned how you essentially switched gears to a support role for the Georgia election. But they're asking, following your campaign against Senator McConnell, did you have any like processing time, or did you like quickly switch into a new function?
It was pretty quick. I think, the election of 2020 was, with Biden winning, it was great in a sense that I felt like, okay, my country isn't going off the planet, it's not going off the deep end, because I was very concerned if Trump would have gotten elected. And so, my defeat was hard. It was hard. It was hard personally. Like anybody that goes through it, it's hard. There's no doubt. But I kept trying to focus on our country. Like, yes, I was defeated, but this wasn't for nothing. Look, we've got Joe Biden as president. That is something, and it is something big. And then, of course, we had the 2 Senate runoffs, which a lot of people felt couldn't be won. A lot of higher ranking folks within the Democratic Party didn't really feel confident that we could win that. And I felt like, you know what, I can just hang this stuff up. But that's not what my duty is. I have an enormous amount of supporters, donors. I can make a plea to them. I can go out and tell them why this is important to not give up. And I can do some work. And it may not matter. Maybe we lose those races like I lost mine. But you know what? I can go to bed at night and I can know that I did everything I could for this country. And so within 48 hours, my team and I had rolled our entire finance operation over, did all the legal work to make that happen. And I'm really proud of the work that we did for the Georgia races.
Okay, sorry, wouldn't let me unmute there. Okay, so here's a question. We'll see if you know this. Paula asked, do you know if civics is a mandated course in Kentucky schools?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I personally think it should be a mandated course in all schools around the country, but I don't know the answer to that.
And just a quick comment here from one Will Brown, and he says, "Happy Aloha Friday to you, Amy." And here's one. I'll give this to you because of your occupation in the military. Given the recent report and the kind of popularity of it, someone wants to know if you ever had any experiences with unidentified aerial phenomena.
I have not, although one of my good friends who is a fellow F-18 pilot, she in the Navy, was one of the pilots who said that she did have some encounter. And so I won't name her name, but I do know somebody that has seen a UFO. It's just not me.
So here's another one, and this is from Dallas, and I'm assuming they mean this book. They say they listened to it over the past 2 days, and they said you did a great job. And so the question is, do you like military shows and/or movies? And if you watch any, does it often result in you yelling at the TV?
That is a great question. It kind of for me started way back in the 80s. A lot of people think that I must have loved Top Gun, right? Because that was like the movie of naval aviation, right? Actually, I didn't like that movie very much. And you know why? Because there were no women doing what I wanted to do. The woman that was the star in that was sort of the love interest, and I just didn't want to be her. And so I do watch occasionally. My husband's a veteran as well. He was a Navy pilot, so occasionally we'll watch movies. We like the historical military movies, like Midway and that sort of thing. But somebody asked me, I did an event in Lexington, a book event here in Kentucky last night, and someone asked me what my favorite military movie was, and I said Dr. Strangelove. Because it's just a classic. I sort of make all of my students watch Dr. Strangelove because there's so much to talk about there.
Why don't we take maybe one more before we have to wrap it up? I know there are a zillion of you out there, but perhaps at the end, Amy will give you some information about where you can go for more information and to connect up with her groups. Great. So maybe you can kind of collate a few of them or combine a few of them for a last question.
Yep. Well, we would need a few more. Well, actually, I'm going to take one for myself here, which, sorry, everyone.
Bring it.
Well, it should be pretty easy, but this is going to be for both you, Amy, and you, Jennifer, as well. And we always ask our contributors here, if you are currently reading anything, can you please just share that with everyone who's viewing?
Wow.
Well, I've been on a tear reading everything that Ben McIntyre has written. He is a nonfiction writer who writes about the Cold War, and the stories he tells are so unbelievable that you think this must be fiction. But his storytelling of World War II, of the post-war, the Cold War period, are just gripping, and I can't recommend his books enough. Ben McIntyre, and there are 5 or 6 of them that I've been working my way through, and just fabulous.
That's great. I'm going to name 3, 2 of which I haven't started yet because they're sitting on my dresser, and I have to get through these other 2. But one is the Michael Lewis one called The Premonition. I really like Michael Lewis. And another one is called, that my husband just bought for me. It's called Forget the Alamo. And I don't know who wrote it, but it's basically about the myth that we have told ourselves in this country about the significance of the Alamo in Texas. So I'm kind of a history nerd, so I like that sort of thing. And then the one I'm halfway through with right now is by Hal Brands, and it's called The General versus the President. And it's about MacArthur and Truman. And again, I'm kind of a history nerd, so I like that sort of thing. So,
well, thank you for having me, Amy. It's always good to talk to you and see you, even if we can't do it in person. So I will sign off and send it back to our friends at Politics and Prose.
And I just want to say thank you so much, Jennifer, for doing this and being a part of this. And a shout out to your new book as well coming out. It's great. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rubin.
All right. And for everybody else, I just want to say thanks for being on here. And if you're interested in Honor Bound, not only the book, but the organization that we've started here, it's honorboundamericans.com. And you can be a founding member of this to try to inspire and get some patriots to run for office and win.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. McGrath. Thank you for both your insightful words here. And of course, we implore everyone to go ahead, buy yourself a copy, buy your friends a copy, buy a couple copies of Honor Bound, spread it around. Thank you all for joining us out there on behalf of Politics and Prose. I want to say to everyone, stay well and stay well read.